Well, welcome everybody. I'm Eric Powell. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us. I'm Director of Communications for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. On behalf of our board of directors and our entire staff, just thank you for being a part of this. I'm here right now in the Andy Granatelli exhibit that we have at the IMS Museum right now. Certainly hope anybody who's going to be around sometime this fall over the winter can come in and check this out along with all of our other exhibits. But right now we're going to talk about the IMS Hall of Fame, which was established in 1952. It honors the legends in motorsports who have made great achievements at the Motor Speedway. We have a panel of about 150 journalists that vote every year on a pre-selected group of potential nominees. And just the way the voting takes place, it is not easy to get into the Motor Speedway Hall of Fame. Normally, we have a dinner in the month of May for our inductees. We're excited we're going to be able to honor Janet. We were sure hoping that Dale would be able to join us back in May. Of course, that didn't work out, and it didn't work out having it in August either, unfortunately. But we do have that event in conjunction with the 500 Old Timers Club, Indianapolis 500 Old Timers Club, I should say. I want to thank them for their continued support and participation with us. Also want to thank our sponsors for that event, which are Firestone, our presenting sponsor, and then Jostens and the Racemaker Press. One more note about the museum, and we'll continue on here. As you can imagine, the pandemic has impacted a lot of museums, nonprofits just like us. We rely on the generosity of our visitors, our members, and sponsors to do what we do to bring you great programming like this Granatelli exhibit. Anytime anyone makes a donation, it's very much appreciated, but I can tell you it is appreciated now more than ever. So if you want to learn more about how you can donate, help out the Motor Speedway and help us, or the IMS Museum, I should say, and just help us continue with our programming, just go to indyracingmuseum.org, and then you can click on the join and give button, and it tells you everything about us. A couple more housekeeping notes, and then we'll get going here. All the audience microphones are going to be turned off throughout the duration, as well as your cameras, so we cannot see you. If you're on a PC or a Mac, should be able to see all four of us at once. If you're on a iPad or a phone, you will only be able to see the person talking at one time, which I know unfortunately is me at the moment. You want to see these other guys, and we'll get to that. But that's just the way it is with technology. That's kind of out of our control. This entire thing is going to be is being filmed, or recorded by Zoom, and we'll have it up on our YouTube page here pretty soon after this. If you have any difficulties at all with your technology, or just concerned something's wrong with it, just email Jennifer Hyatt. That's jhyatt@brickyard.com or jhiatt@brickyard.com, and she'll help you out. So now it's time to get this thing going, and I'm going to introduce our MC for the night. He is known around the motorsports world, but he's definitely one of the most passionate Indy 500 fans out there, anywhere, globally. He was one of ESPN's very first employees within the whole company, covered motorsports for ESPN and ABC for 20 years, primarily NASCAR, some IndyCar races, and the 500 as well. He was the global voice of the Indianapolis 500 from 1990 to 1998 on the IMS radio network, and anchored IndyCar coverage for Versus, which is now, of course, NBCSN, the great partners that Dale works for, and with NASCAR and IndyCar. So I'm talking about Bob Jenkins, of course. He technically retired in 2012, but I know better. You're out here every day, busy with the IMSPA and doing all kinds of things, Bob. So also proud to say that he is a member of the IMS Hall of Fame as of 1 year ago. So Bob, floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Eric. Yeah, boy, that night a year ago, last May, was one of the highlights of my entire career, because, as you said, it's It's great to be among the very few who have received a Hall of Fame award, and I'm very proud to have done that. Now, however, we have two others who are being inducted into the Hall of Fame. The induction ceremony will not take place until next year in May, but we're having this so that we can talk to them and congratulate them on the fact that they have been voted into the IMS Hall of Fame. And those inductees are Janet Guthrie, who became the first female to be assigned to a car on the Indianapolis 500 entry list in 1976. She didn't make a qualifying attempt that year, but returned the following year and became the first female qualifier in 500 race history. She finished ninth in 78, which stood as the best female finish in race history until Danica Patrick's fourth place finish in 2005. She was also the first female to ever compete in a NASCAR event on a super speedway. In 1976, World 600 at Charlotte, and then the following February, she became the first female competitor in the Daytona 500, finishing a respectable 12th. Later that season, Guthrie recorded her career best NASCAR finish of 6th at Bristol Motor Speedway. Janet also earned, and get this, her pilot's license at age 17 and was a candidate for NASA's space program before the agency made it mandatory for astronauts to possess a doctoral degree. Our second inductee, Dale Earnhardt, who made his NASCAR Cup Series debut in the 75 World 600, but did not run a full season until signing on with Rod Osterlund in 1979. His rise to stardom was almost immediate. In his first full-time season, Earnhardt won his first race at Bristol and was declared Rookie of the Year. 1 year later, in 1980, Earnhardt won his first Cup Series championship and also won the title in 1986, 87, 90, 91, 93, and 94. Indianapolis, North Carolina native won 76 total Cup Series races, including the 1998 Daytona 500, and he was incredibly talented at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, scoring 5 top 10 finishes and 7 Brickyard starts, with a victory in the 1995 edition of the Brickyard 400. Well, Janet, I'm going to start with you and just point out that I have my ring on. Could you show us yours from representing your Hall of Fame ring from Jostens? Tell us what it means to you.
I was so incredibly thrilled to receive this ring. I was thrilled to find out I'd even been nominated for the Hall of Fame, and I never expected that I would be voted in. So it's been really quite an extraordinary year.
Dale, been a long time since I've seen you. You're busy, of course, with all of your TV work, but I think maybe you have your dad's Hall of Fame medallion that you might show us and give us your thoughts on and how he would react to this.
Yes, very, very nice. And it means a lot to our family that Dad's honored. I have to say it's an incredible honor for me tonight to be able to celebrate Janet. I'm a big fan of hers, and so excited about that. But Dad really had a lot of respect for the Speedway. I remember how excited he was about the opportunity to go test at Indianapolis Speedway to prepare for the first Cup race there with NASCAR. He wanted to be the first in the garage, the first in the car, the first out on the racetrack, because he wanted that honor because of his respect for the facility and the history of the track. And it meant a lot for him to be able to claim a victory at one of the most important facilities in motorsports history. So I'm honored to be able to accept this tonight on his behalf.
I recall one thing about that test, Dale, and that was that many of the drivers were as interested as taking photos of us, the fans, than the fans were taking photos of the drivers. Remember that?
Yeah, it was, you have to understand that Indy was Indy for any motorsports fan or driver of any sort of discipline is the it's the top of the mountain, and NASCAR never dreamed of having the opportunity to go there and compete and be there. And due to the schedules, a lot of times it conflicted with the opportunity to even see the Indy 500. So just to be there in person and actually be able to take a race car, something you love to do and have done all your life, out onto the racetrack must have been an incredible experience for that first time for those drivers back in the 90s.
Janet, it's obvious that when you came to the Speedway in 1976, you had some struggles, not only in terms of getting the car ready to qualify, but also in fighting the hatred, if you might say, of many of the people who thought that females weren't necessarily popular in the garage area, let alone on the racetrack.
Well, that was a rather popular opinion at the time, but I felt certain that once they got used to the idea that I knew what I was doing, I was a courteous driver, and I was competitive, that attitudes would change. Excuse me. And one of my greatest pleasures, in fact, was that attitudes did change. In fact, possibly beginning at that NASCAR Cup race at Charlotte, what it was at that time, the World 600, still the longest race in NASCAR. And I qualified right behind Dale Earnhardt. He qualified 25th and I qualified 27th. And the other member of Dale Earnhardt's row was Bill Elliott. So that was sort of fun, and attitudes started to change.
Tell us how you felt and what struggles you had to go through when you finally did qualify for the race in '77.
Oh, well, that was quite a year. Rala Walstad, who is the man to whom I will be eternally grateful for giving me my great chance, had purchased a good car, and we had had an opportunity to test it for a couple of days at Ontario, California, a track that was very much like Indianapolis, only wider. So we arrived in pretty good shape, and indeed, I did set the fastest time of day on opening day of practice. I'll never forget when we got back to the garage, Rala looked at me and said, "Well, Guthrie, that ought to get their attention." And I was still among the top 10 on Tuesday. That car had a rising rate rear suspension, which was theoretically very fast, but it gave the driver no feedback whatsoever. And people who owned those cars usually put an Eagle rear end into them. But I lost it in turn 2 and hit the wall with the right front. Well, the car was a prototype. There were no spares. Everything had to be built from scratch. Rala was not a very rich team, and his best fabricator was still back in Oregon finishing up my teammate's car. To make a long story short, it took until the very last day of qualifying before I was able to make a qualifying run. And the engine was making noises, probably the timing chains. And of course, I'd been doing all my own mechanical work for 13 years, and I knew engines, and this sound meant that the engine could come undone at any minute. But thank goodness it lasted until the checkered flag came down, and I was in the field. That was quite a moment.
Janet, there are no females in this year's Indy 500 lineups, the first time since 2000. Are you disappointed at the fact that there aren't more females in especially our type of racing?
There have been a great many women who have the talent. The problem is finding the enormous amount of money that it takes to field a car in this venue. Pippa Mann has been doing the impossible for several years. She's not with the top running team. She drives one race a year at Indianapolis, and last year she finished 16th. If she had a decent shot, she would have been in the field this year, excuse me, and she's a very capable driver. The woman I think had the greatest talent was Sarah Fisher, who qualified on the pole for an IndyCar race, had, I believe, a second place finish in an IndyCar race, and she couldn't find the money to continue either. It is a significant problem. I've always said that what this sport really needs is a woman with all that it takes, the talent, the desire, the emotional detachment, the concentration, et cetera, and her own fortune as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember you driving A.J. Foyt's car around the track a few laps. Can you recount that for us?
Oh, that was in 1976 when Ralph Walstad's car, I didn't have the speed. And in fact, Tom Bigelow, the all-time sprint car victory holder, had not been able to put it in the field the previous year, and no more could I in 76. Well, Ralph Walstad, the man whom I owe the man who changed my life, really, I did something unprecedented for a team owner. He went out looking for another car for me to drive, a car that wouldn't be his. And A.J. Foyt agreed to let me take his car, his backup car, out in practice. And obviously I brought that up to speed and could have put it in the race, but I mean, it was like, oh dear, Raul is gone now. I hope he can't hear this, but it was like getting out of a Model T and into a Ferrari. But AJ decided not to let me make a qualifying attempt with it. So I had to wait until 1977.
In a few minutes, Janet, I want to talk to you about the book that you wrote and some of the incredibly interesting stories that are in that book. And by the way, I do not exaggerate in any way. That was one of the most well-written and just memorable books about auto racing and those who have participated in it that I have ever read. So congratulations. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But right now, I want to turn our attention to Dale Earnhardt Jr. Do you remember his winning the Brickyard here in 1995? And what were your thoughts and what were his thoughts?
Well, he liked to pick with Jeff Gordon quite a bit. They had a very competitive but friendly rivalry, and they were business partners as well. And Jeff obviously won the Brickyard, the inaugural Brickyard 400, and Dad would come in and win the following year and get out of the car and say that he was the first man to win the race, but cracking a joke at Jeff's age. But you know, you could see if you watch the his reaction, his own reaction in Victory Circle, you can see the relief in the fact that he has this victory, because I think he even knew at that point that he was in the back end or of his career, and he probably knew that his days were numbered, and as far as his opportunity to win such an important race, there were going to be very few of those. So he was, I can see or sense, in watching that video of him in Victory Circle, of how thankful or how lucky and fortunate he feels in that moment. And he was not that way. He wasn't that type of person for the majority of his career. He was out to win. And as soon as he won, he was focused on the next race to go try to conquer that. And he wasn't a guy that would savor a moment, and wasn't one that measured, victories. But when he knew when Indy came onto the schedule and when Cup NASCAR drivers were going to finally have an opportunity to win races at this historic facility, he knew how important that was.
I think the most emotional that I ever saw your dad was at the 96 Brickyard. When he had been injured at Talladega, he started the car but gave it up to Mike Skinner within a few laps. Your dad was really, really sorry to give up that ride, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, again, he wasn't a person to show those type of emotions, and wasn't a guy. I'd never heard his voice crack his entire life over anything, right? And but I think we all saw something in him for the first time when he had to get out of the car that day. And it just, I never knew that was so important to him. And nobody likes to see their own car going around the racetrack with somebody else in it. But, in certain situations such as that, when there's such a bad injury, it's understandable, but even to him, it was a hard thing to do. And, he wasn't going to allow that to be a habit or a weekly thing. He was back in the car and racing the full races within the next week or two.
Here comes the question I've always wanted to ask him and you. Did he ever express an interest in running the Indianapolis 500?
Oh, I'm sure he was curious. If you're not, if you're a race car driver, you're always curious about other disciplines and what those cars feel like, drive like. So I know that he had to be extremely curious. I hate to speak for him, but I can also imagine, because it's something that I felt, is the danger, open cockpit, open wheel cars. We grew up racing stock cars with fenders and roll cages around us, and felt, extremely safe. And we would watch the Indy cars and think that they were daredevils and just this incredible amount of bravery to propel themselves around the racetrack at these ridiculous speeds. So I'm certain that there was some mental roadblocks that he would have to get through to probably convince himself to even get in and drive one of those cars around Indianapolis. But if somebody was ever to propose that to him in the moment, he would have done it.
Yeah.
Because just to prove a point, because he wouldn't back down. But I imagine he would have been more nervous about doing anything. That would have probably been the most nervous he would have ever been in a race car had that ever happened, I'm sure.
You're retired. You ever think about doing it?
I probably would have in my 20s or early 30s when I was a lot more crazy, I guess, is the only thing that comes to mind. And it's an extremely safe sport, and they made a lot of innovation over even the last year to really make it a safe sport. And I think that's really piqued the interest of a lot of current drivers in NASCAR. Jimmy Johnson, for example, just told me this week that he wants to run 12 to 13 races in IndyCar next year. Blew me away to hear that from him.
Yeah.
But I think for me, personally, that ship has sailed for me. I'm 45 years old, and I say that because I get into the Xfinity car once a year, and it's a reminder that these are elite drivers, even in that series, in the IndyCar series, in the Cup series. These are the best of the best. You don't walk onto the field and expect to just compete and be competitive. And I would be a fool to imagine that I could step into that car and go out there and get a lot out of it, or get the most out of it. So, had I been younger and presented that opportunity, it probably would have been something I'd have considered.
We have some questions for you submitted by our listeners, and you, our viewers, you have to get away about 7 o'clock. Is that correct?
I'll stay as long as you need.
Well, thank you, Dale. All right, Rick asked, and we talked about this briefly before we went on the air. Rick says he enjoyed your Lost Speedways episode on Jungle Park. Has the show gotten you more interested in early open wheel racing history? And I might explain that Jungle Park was a very, very popular racetrack that was located west of Indianapolis, almost to the Illinois line. But it was a very dangerous racetrack that your show, Lost Speedways, apparently was. I haven't seen it, but apparently it was a very, very good show.
Yeah, I think that doing we're excited for the opportunity to do more shows with Lost Speedway, and it gives us that opportunity to go into racetracks and places and different types of racing that we don't know much about. And I knew nothing about Jungle Park, and it's really been an education for me to learn about these racetracks, to learn about early sprint car racing and the history of IndyCar and so forth, and open wheel racing in America. So I really enjoy everything we learn. Obviously, being boots on the ground and being able to walk the actual racetrack and seeing evidence of the track, the imprint of the track in the surface of the ground. Maybe there's a few structures that are available still located at the racetrack to look at. All that stuff is really fun, and it really gets your imagination going, trying to figure out what that track was like in its heyday. But yeah, I think that's the fun challenge for me. Going around to stock car tracks or NASCAR associated racetracks is too easy. It's much more fun to go to some of these racetracks that maybe I don't know as much about, or some tracks that might be obscure to the stock car fan or the NASCAR fan. So that certainly was one that a lot of people really talk about, and it's a fun episode.
All right, let's, since you can stay with us a few minutes after 7 o'clock, let's turn back to Janet. And again, I compliment you highly on your book, Janet Guthrie, A Life at Full Throttle, and the 30-minute or 4:30 program that was on ESPN called Qualified. Now, from your book, I learned that you grew up in the Miami area, dodging rattlesnakes, panthers, and mosquitoes. Is that a pretty accurate statement?
We lived out in the piney woods about 13 miles southwest of downtown Miami. And yeah, that's a pretty accurate description. However, I did have the great good fortune to attend a private girls' school, which I entered in the 2nd grade. The public schools wouldn't have me because I was too young, but I already knew how to read and all that. So Ms. Harris put me in the 2nd grade, and that's where I graduated from. It was a really wonderful school. I was very lucky to go there.
And during this period, tell me about the encounter you had in your haunted house.
Oh my goodness, you do have a good memory there.
Well, how many persons like you have experienced an incident in a haunted house?
We only lived in it for one summer. It was right on Biscayne Bay. I thought it was beautiful beyond belief. But my youngest sister used to come crying into my parents' bed in the night, and one night I woke up with an iron grasp around my wrist, and I screamed, and I was not a person who ever screamed. I was about 13 or so then. And my parents came running down the upstairs deck, and I found that it was actually my own hand grasping my wrist. But, you know, nothing like that has ever happened before or since. And it wasn't until we moved out of that house that we learned there had been a double axe murder there in the 20s. So that was an experience with the supernatural, you might say.
Janet, how did your interest in aviation begin?
Well, my father flew for Eastern Airlines, but he had a lot of strings to his bow, and he gave me my first few lessons. But I was very relieved when he turned me over to an instructor whose rating, flight instructor's rating was current. Because, you know, I'd beg to go flying, I'd do things wrong, he'd yell, I'd cry. When I got over it, I'd beg to go flying again. But I did solo with 8 hours spread over, I think, 3 years, and got my private pilot's license when I was 17 with 40 hours. And then while I was in college, got my commercial and flight instructor's rating. So flying was really my first love. But when I graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in physics and went to work for Republic Aviation out Long Island, sorry, I don't know if this is showing up on your screen.
You're okay.
Your screen is picking up incoming emails. I do apologize.
It's okay. You're good.
In any event, Long Island was full of air traffic, and I had my eye on an AT6, which was stressed for 6 Gs positive and 6 Gs negative, and you could do outside loops in an AT6. But I realized there was nowhere I could go and have fun on Long Island. It was just too crowded. And so I went away and I bought a 7-year-old Jaguar XK120 MC instead. And that was the big watershed. I started out running one car at a time competitions. And by 1963, I had my Sports Car Club of America license. And I raced in Sports Car Club of America for 13 years. And since I had no trust fund, I was building my own engines and sleeping in the back of my tow cars, and then walking around pretending I was just as rich as the rest of my competitors. I think I made a pretty good show of it.
Yeah, I think you did too. So what led you to the aerospace business?
Well, at that time, a woman couldn't fly for the airlines, a woman couldn't fly for the military. So I thought, well, I'll study aeronautical engineering. That's what led me to the University of Michigan, which had one of the best programs in the country at the time. But I spent my freshman year mixing up batches of concrete, sand, and gravel and drawing pictures of the threads on screws, which wasn't what I had in mind. So I changed to a physics major, and that was a much better fit.
Do you regret, though, following the race driver path than the aerospace engineering path?
No. It became clear to me that racing was what I was born to do. I had all the screwball stuff that it takes to drive race cars, and it was a passion and an obsession for a long time.
Again, questions from our audience. Jeff asks, given your intelligence and knowledge of racing cars, how much input did you have in adjusting the car's setup?
Well, when I drove for Rala Walstad's team, at that time, you know, the driver's seat of the pants was everything. You didn't have engineers tracking everything the car did on computers. It was a different world in the 70s. And I remember at one point, we didn't know how much the springs were compressing. And there seemed to be a problem there. So I went to a florist shop and got a lump of florist's clay and stuck them in between the coils of the spring to figure out what was going on. So that was a very long time ago, of course, and things have changed a great deal since then. But I did want to say one thing, Bob, if you don't mind. Did I mention my first outing with Dale's father?
And that you were teaching, right?
No. The first time I ever had anything to do with Dale's father was at my very first NASCAR Cup race, the World 600 at Charlotte. And he qualified 25th and I qualified 27th, right behind him. And the other driver on the row in front was Bill Elliott. If I repeat myself, I apologize. But it makes it particular fun for us to be
yes.
there.
But you were teammates with Dale, were you not, in the 80 Daytona 500 for Rod Osterlund?
Yes, sort of teammates. It was a one-shot deal, and did not have the outcome that I hoped for. but what can I say? Not worth going into. I believe Dale gave me a hand when he learned what was going on, but it was after all the practice was over with.
Let's give you an opportunity to ask Dale Earnhardt Jr. a question, and then if you have any, and then we'll have Dale Earnhardt Jr. ask you a question. So do you have anything that you want to ask Dale Jr.?
Oh, I guess I might be curious how much pressure it put on him to be the son of such an idolized race driver.
Good question.
Yeah, you know, it was at first it wasn't a lot of pressure. I was thrilled just to be racing, because when I was a teenager, a young teenager, 13 to 15 years old, I was very fearful that I'd never get a chance to race, that some way, somehow it just would never materialize. So when I actually did get behind the steering wheel, I was so excited that I didn't even consider what I was up against. And that started to really happen when I got into the Cup Series in 2000. We had so much success in the Xfinity Series. Again, we never really thought much about the pressures and living under his shadow or racing under his shadow. But when I got in the Cup Series and we struggled, that's when things got difficult, because there was a lot of pressure from sponsors, race fans, media. Everyone was ready to tell it like it was, and sometimes that was hard to hear. But you know, you have to understand at some point in your life that you might not win 7 championships, you know, and you might not win, you know, all those races, and you had to really appreciate what you were able to control and accomplish and participate. And so I took it. That's when I started to, I think, focus on just trying to be a good asset to the sport, however I could, try to be a great representative for the sport and try to help, you know, the sport succeed.
And do you have a question for Janet or a comment?
I do. You know, we hear a lot about your career in the late 70s with your experiences in Indy and your experiences with NASCAR. I'm curious, what were the final few years of your career like, and what was that like for you, I guess, to come to terms as a guy who just recently retired? I guess this makes me curious. What was your experience with finally having to make that decision with not driving? What, you know, you say it was such a passion of yours. Do you recall with that being a difficult decision? Was that an easy decision for you? And how did you go about that?
Well, that was actually painful beyond belief. I really only had one full season of racing, and that was 1977. And apart from that, it was just spotty, a race here and there. So I spent 79, 80, 81, 82, 83 trying to find sponsorship to run a full season. And in 83, I figured out that if I kept that up, I was going to jump out of a high window. So that's when I started working on my book.
Dale, since you are retired, you have a very proud position working TV. How do you like it?
I love it. You know, it's when I was younger and when I raced, I had some guys that I idolized or thought did a very good job. You were one of them. Benny Parsons. Yeah, Benny Parsons was one. Barney Hall and Ken Squire, just an amazing broadcaster. And I think that I realized by watching you guys how important your role was. We could have the most amazing race on the racetrack in front of us, but if the broadcast doesn't do their job to convey that, the fan will never know it. And when the sport goes through these ups and downs of prosperity and struggle, I feel like that the broadcasters really play a big role in that. And when things are difficult, we need to be able to really help the fan understand why this is a great sport, why this is fun to watch, why they need to be interested. And so I feel like and there's some energy, I think, that's critical to a broadcast. So So there's some passion, you got to love what you're doing and love what you're watching. And so that's been an easy thing for me, to have that passion and love for it and let that come out in what I'm saying and seeing. And hopefully it's something I get to do for a long time. It's you're never guaranteed anything, and I really enjoy it, but the fans have to enjoy it too. They have to enjoy what they hear from me in the booth, and hopefully that's working out, and we get to do this for a while, because it really is a lot of fun. I love being at the track, and it keeps me sort of plugged into the sport.
I couldn't agree with you more. You also have your own TV show, don't you?
Well, we have a podcast called the Dale Jr. Download that we've done for years. I'd love to have Janet on. I'm just thinking about that right now, listening to her talk. I'm like, what a great guest she would be. But we actually do the podcast and edit and release that the same day. And then the podcast gets cut into a television show, a much shorter version for NBC, and that airs weekly. So we have a lot of fun with that. We also have Lost Speedways that you mentioned, which is on Peacock, which is NBC's streaming platform, and it's free. If you go download Peacock, you can watch all 8 episodes of Lost Speedways. And we go around, I told you I love the history, and we go around all these old abandoned racetracks from way back in the day and tell their story and what they meant to those communities. And it's a lot of fun, because it's some racetracks that I'd never even knew much about. But I'm having a lot of fun, on the media side of it, and learning a lot too. That always being a race car driver, I wasn't very accommodating all the time with the media, but I certainly learned that they have a job to do as well. And it's taught me a lot.
I have a suggestion for your Lost Speedways. There is a dirt track located not too far from Eldora Speedway in Ohio, Western Ohio. It's called New Bremen. And it too was a very popular racetrack. It was actually bought by Earl Baltus, who ran and owned Eldora at the time. And then he closed it down. But the last time I was there, the grandstands were still there. The track was still there. So it might make a good show for you.
Absolutely. Any track that has a little evidence left is the ones that are going to be most interesting to us, that we can go and put cameras on.
All right, another question. Go ahead, Janet.
I have to mention Bridgehampton out at the end of Long Island. I believe NASCAR came there one time in the 60s. I know they did, because one of the NASCAR drivers came over and said, "Y'all got any strang?" And it took me a minute. And he said, "I needed to check my toe, but I forgot my string." So I got him some string, and that was interesting, because Sports Car Club of America was running a race together with NASCAR, and NASCAR apparently didn't like sharing pits with women, so there was a little fuss made about that. But that was a very long time ago, of course.
Okay, Dale, another question from a listener and viewer. Lynn is from Speedway, Indiana, and asks, what kind of cars did you start out in, and how long before you got your first NASCAR ride?
Yeah, so I started in a street stock, was what it was called. It was a 78 Monte Carlo that me and my brother built, and my dad helped us with the safety aspects of the car. And that was back around 1994-3 maybe. And I ran some stock cars locally at some short tracks around here for a few years before I finally got a ride in the Xfinity Series, eventually with my dad, which turned into a very successful deal for me in 98 and 99. And after that, we went to Cup. It was really good.
This year, of course, is a year that is different from any other that I've ever experienced, but I can imagine, or I think I can imagine, the added responsibility for you as an announcer in keeping the race exciting and without fans there backing you up, or you reacting from the fans who might be cheering or whatever.
The hardest part of that job is not being able to look out of the window in front of you and watch the race. We're not at the racetrack. We're in Charlotte, North Carolina, calling from a studio there. And as an analyst, and I love to look out the window, and you can tell as you're watching cars go around the track that there's going to be a battle for position here in a few laps. This guy's running this other guy down, and I want to take the camera there. There's going to be a good fight here. Let's watch this. We can't do that anymore because we can't look at, we don't have the opportunity and the tools to do that. But that's probably one of many things that I miss about being at the racetrack and being able to do the job as well as I want to do it. We are given everything to succeed with NBC, and we're doing the best we can with what we have. And I know we may fall short of some expectations from the fans, but we work really hard to try to give them the best opportunity to see the race that's out there on the racetrack. And like I said before, the racing has been great, and it's our responsibility to make sure the fan feels that and understands that when they've watched it.
There's no question that your dad was one of, if not the most popular stock car driver ever. Arguably, I guess, with Richard Petty and others. But how do you think that he would react to the fact that he has been inducted into so many Hall of Fames, just about every one, including the HOF here at the Speedway?
I'm not real sure. I really have a hard time understanding exactly what Dad would be like today. And it's been so long since he passed away. It's really hard for me to imagine him in his 70s or into his 80s, what type of person he would have been. People change, we all change so much as we go through life. And I'm sure his personality probably would have evolved a little bit. And I don't know how involved he would have wanted to be in NASCAR, but the acknowledgments would have really, hit him personally and touched him deeply. As we know, he was still racing when we lost him, and he was still a competitor with that sort of competitor edge and always walking around with a frown on his face and gritting his teeth. But I think in retirement, he would have become a lot softer and a lot more appreciative of the acknowledgement and the credit that he would have gotten for what he did for the sport. And that was, I guess one of the things that jumps into my mind is when he passed away, those days right after that, we really were blown away by how many people cared about that, whether it was something on television or the people out of nowhere in so many different walks of life in so many different corners of the world were affected by that or knew his name. That just blew my mind. We all had lived in this little bubble and thought that we only mattered to the people inside that bubble. And so I think that had he known, I really wish that he had known that. And I remember feeling that when we lost him. I wish that he would have really known how far he reached. I don't think he even knew it. So he would be certainly feeling that tonight had he been here with us.
Very good answer. He was known as the Intimidator. Did you want to be when you entered Cup racing?
No, I didn't have what it took to be the Intimidator. I'm a little too sensitive for that, but I don't think anybody could emulate that. He was had that certain thing about him that you could tell it when he walked in the room. It was all, he didn't have to be behind the wheel of a car.
Did he have any impact on the way your driving style?
I'm certain it did. I never really thought much about my style and adapting it to any particular driver, but I would watch people handle things and say, okay, that worked out pretty well. I'll try that approach. And whether it was something that happened in the car or outside of the car. And I always wanted the best result, or the least resistance or the least confrontational and all of that. So I was always pretty easygoing and I felt like I gave the guys, the room they needed, and they gave me the room I needed. And tried to have a good race, but you know, he certainly went about it his own way in a unique way, and nobody will ever be like him, I don't think.
That's for sure. Janet, looking back over your career, was there anything that you would have changed?
Oh, yeah, I would have been born rich.
Good answer. Me too.
Would have made my racing career a lot different, I think. No, I believe all along the way I did everything I possibly could to race as best I could. It was a passion and an obsession, and I can't think of anything that I would change. And I'd just like again to express how much I appreciate Rollo Walstad calling me, somebody I had never heard of, saying, how would you like to take a shot at Indianapolis? And I'm thinking, oh yeah, right, another joker. But I called up Chris Economaki the next morning and said, who is Rollo Walstad? And Chris assured me that Rollo was real. And I could never thank him enough for changing my whole life. And also my NASCAR Cup team owner, Linda Ferrari, who was a banker. I mean, she knew nothing about stock car racing when Humpy Wheeler asked her to buy a car for me to drive at Charlotte. And she used to say, well, I said to him, can she drive my Mercedes? It's a stock car. And she learned. She was a really quick study, and I'm very grateful to her.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
I have another question for Janet.
Good.
If we got a minute.
Great. Yeah.
You mentioned the race at Bristol where she had such a good result. I was just wondering if she remembered much about that weekend. Going to Bristol, you know, as someone who hadn't had a lot of time in a stock car, that must have been pretty intimidating. I remember the first time I went there, it was rather intimidating.
Well, my crew chief said he nearly did something unmentionable driving the truck with the race car in it down over the banking into the infield. It was interesting. I had driven there in the spring race and then came back in August. And in August, we had the setup right on the money from the beginning. I went out and did some practice laps, and Jim said, how's it feel? I said, it feels pretty good to me. And so we changed a couple of little things for qualifying, and I forget where I qualified, but it was I think it was in the top 10. I'm sure it was in the top 10. And so Jim said, well, I had changed a couple of things for the race, and I said, it feels pretty good to me. So we went back to the hotel, I think before practice even ended, and the guys threw Linda in the pool, chic clothes and all, and it was a great race. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dale. Scott from Crawfordsville, Indiana says, is there a track anywhere in the world you wish you could have raced on and never did? Dale, we'll start with you and then ask Janet the same question.
That's a great question. Boy, that's a tough one. Oh man, probably the original Atlanta before they put the dog leg in.
Yeah.
I think they did the dog leg in 96 or 95. I can't remember, but I really used to go to that race, and Dad was so good there. And whenever you won that race, they gave you a ski nautique boat. And I remember Dad had about 6 ski nautique boats in the warehouse by the time he was done. And so many that he let me use one when I was 16, and he wasn't that type of guy. But he had so many, it was okay, I guess. The straightaways were like, I don't know, the corners I know were almost twice as long as the straightaways. Mm-hmm. Just a really unique track. And I really wish I could have raced on the original configuration of Atlanta and also Bristol when it was asphalt. I know Janet got to race on the asphalt Bristol track, and it's been concrete ever since I've been involved.
Yep. Janet, how about you?
Well, when I was driving sports cars, my objective was always to drive Le Mans and the Targa Florio around the island of Sicily. But in road racing, I guess the track I would have liked to race on and never did was Road America in Wisconsin. A very challenging track. My favorite was Bridgehampton, the track I mentioned before. It had a very long straightaway at the end of which were 2 fast downhills that you had to commit to before you could see them. Oh, Bridgehampton was a fabulous track. It's mostly been plowed under, but there are still bits of the front straight, those 2 incredible downhills at the end of it. Yeah, I wish I could have driven Le Mans or the Targa Florio.
Very good. Well, I cannot thank you, Dale Jr., for taking the time to be with us tonight. Anytime an auto racing enthusiast can be in either a virtual presence or a real presence of one of the members of the Earnhardt family, it is a real pleasure. It has been for me. Long time no see, but hopefully we'll see each other soon. And I can't thank you enough for being here with us tonight. And congratulations on your dad being inducted into the IMS Hall of Fame.
Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate the Hall of Fame for honoring my father. And again, it's been such a pleasure for me to celebrate Janet tonight. Congratulations, Janet. And I look forward to seeing all you in person very soon.
All right, Dale, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Janet, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. You have been an inspiration for a lot of women and a lot of men for that matter, because I know what you went through to be the racing personality that you were and always will be as far as I'm concerned. So thanks for being with us and congratulations on being inducted into the IMS Hall of Fame.
Thank you so much. I was thrilled. And Bob, I got to tell you, I figure you have the hard part of this thing, figuring out the questions to ask. And so I think you do a fabulous job of it.
Thank you. Again, that book, Janet Guthrie, A Life of Full Throttle. If you are a racing enthusiast and has never read it, please do. The stories in there are incredible, and it's a very, very well-written book. So, Eric, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Dale and Janet, thank you so much for being part of this. Dale, thank you for taking some extra time with us. Really appreciate that. But Janet, you know, you're a wonderful ambassador for the 500, the Speedway, for a long time. It's wonderful to have you as part of our Hall of Fame. Dale, come up and visit anytime. Give you a VIP tour of the museum. Hope to see you guys soon. Again, thank you to everyone else who is on the audience tonight. We had a pretty much a full house of participants. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us on behalf of the museum and our board. It's an honor to have you all here. Certainly an honor to be on a call like this with the 3 of you personally, and it just means a lot to our staff that you would take the time to do this. So again, thank you very much. I want to thank again our sponsors, Firestone, Jostens, Racemaker Press, and the 500 Old Timers for all their support. I want to thank Tony Mayhoff and Mike Davis at JR Motorsports and Joe Crowley with True Speed Communication helping us out here. Just a reminder, again, anytime anyone interested in becoming a member of the IMS Museum, we're continually coming up with new ideas for more programming. Please just have a look at our website, go to indyracingmuseum.org, and just go to Join and Give, and we appreciate the support there. 104th running in the Indianapolis 500 on Sunday. Coverage starts at 1 o'clock on NBC, and then, of course, Dale, I think you're going to be busy on Sunday too, right?
So, yeah, we have the Dover races to watch as well, but
indeed,
we'll be tuning in to both.
Yeah, well, I hope everybody will too. So again, thank you everyone for your participation. Bob, great job as always. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I think that's it from Indy. So good night, everyone.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night.